Imagine the sound of your soul before you were born. Not a sound made of air or voice, but an ancient hum, as if every cell carried a memory your mind was never meant to hold. Now, imagine that this sound tried to become form, body, story, but somewhere along the way, something was lost. What if evolution was never about the body? What if Darwin's most dangerous theory wasn't about monkeys, but about spirits? In a rarely quoted letter to his friend Hooker in 1844, Darwin wrote, "It's as if we're being moved by an invisible force, not just to survive, but towards something beyond." This line was later buried under the fame of The Origin of Species, but some believe that in that moment, Darwin glimpsed something the world wasn't ready to hear. That evolution may not be just a chain of physical mutations, but a reflection of something much deeper and more forbidden. This isn't just a video, it's a warning for those who dare to remember. Because true evolution might begin when instinct breaks down. Pause. Breathe. Have you noticed how in moments of crisis you don't think, you react? You freeze, run, or lash out, as if something ancient takes over, something deeper than thought. Science calls it the reptilian brain, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's the echo of a time when being human simply meant surviving, and maybe suffering is the first sign that this survival mode no longer serves you. Maybe pain is the final cry of the instinct, trying not to be forgotten. But maybe it's also the first whisper of the soul. If you're watching this, you might have been called not to change your life, but to remember a life that was never fully forgotten. There are documents, lost writings, stories of transformations no eye could see, of souls shifting form before the body ever caught on. This is where the visible and invisible collapse, where Darwin meets Jung, where Cayce whispers to Gruff, where symbols hold more truth than facts. What you're about to experience is not a lesson. It's a sequence of echoes, codes, and metaphors. You don't need to believe. You just need to feel. Because maybe you never truly forgot. Maybe you just stopped listening, and now the sound of your soul is returning, slowly, in spirals, like a serpent that rises. Picture a bird, born to fly, yet afraid of the sky. Wings wide open, but always landing too soon. That's the human condition. We've evolved. We've mastered fire, crossed oceans, built machines, and yet we break in the same places, fear the same losses, repeat the same wounds. Our biology has advanced, but our souls keep looping. Darwin saw this. In his private notes, buried beneath public science, he wrestled with gaps in the fossil record, leaps that made no logical sense. He hinted at something else, a non-identifiable force. He never explained it, never published it. Maybe he was afraid, or maybe he was silenced. What if that force was consciousness? Instinct is ancient. It taught us to cry for help, to run from danger, to seek safety in numbers. But now, instinct doesn't save us. It sabotages us. The same fear that once protected you now keeps you small. The anger that once defended you now keeps love at bay. The craving to belong now chains you to people and places your soul has already outgrown. The instinct that once helped you survive now blocks your evolution. And that's the hidden crisis. Your biology is too old for your current pain, and your soul is too vast for a world that only teaches survival. You've probably felt it, that you're too aware for the noise around you, but too raw for the depth inside you. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a field of memory beyond time, accessed not through logic, but through symptoms. Dreams, despair, déjà vu. Maybe your pain didn't begin with you. Maybe you're just the latest echo, and maybe that's why you keep repeating. Not because you're lost, but because you're remembering something deeper than the mind can hold. Imagine your life as a timeline. You learned to walk, to speak. But somewhere in the quiet, you also began to feel, to awaken, to crave more than survival. That was the real beginning. But instinct didn't want that, because awakening threatens control. And so many of us sabotage our growth, not because we're weak, but because we're still wired to fear the unknown, still loyal to a version of ourselves that only knew how to survive. Science can't fully explain this, because what we're facing isn't measurable. Pain doesn't show up in data. Grief doesn't follow formulas. The soul doesn't fit in charts. Maybe evolution happens in silence. Maybe Darwin was right, just incomplete. And maybe the next leap isn't a new species, but a new frequency of being. There are wounds that don't bleed, fractures that don't show up in scans, and mutations that don't change your face, but rearrange your soul. Have you ever felt different, even when nothing around you had changed? Like something inside you had shifted, but had no name. That's how spiritual mutation begins. Biology teaches that mutations are accidents, errors that sometimes help us adapt. But in the realm of consciousness, mutations aren't random, they're invitations, and they almost always begin with pain. Jung, while exploring dreams, noticed something Darwin never imagined. The unconscious doesn't just reflect reality, it reshapes it. When we suffer, symbols emerge, not as metaphors, but as instructions, as blueprints for a new version of self. Imagine going through grief. Not just the loss of a person, but the collapse of an identity, of a belief, of a life you thought you'd live. What changes in you is not just emotional, it's existential. Old parts of you dissolve, and something new, fragile, unnamed, luminous, starts to emerge. What ignites this transformation? Pain. Not any pain, but the kind that strips you bare, the kind you can't ignore, the kind that insists, wake up. That's why some souls awaken, while others stay asleep, not because of luck, but because of how they respond to their breaking point. Some distract, some numb, but others listen, and in listening, they mutate. You've seen it. Two people, same trauma, one collapses, the other transforms. It's not the event that defines them. It's the willingness to let go of who they were, to become who they might be. But these shifts aren't seen by the world. They don't get applause. They don't show up in test results, because they happen in the invisible. They happen through archetypes. The wise old man, the wounded child, the snake, the labyrinth. These aren't just cultural figures, they're soul codes. They emerge in our dreams, our visions, our breakdowns, as thresholds, each. One, a door. Jung said, "Symbols arise when language fails. When your pain can't be explained, it draws pictures, and those images change you." But not everyone accepts the invitation. Some stay stuck in stories, in control, in surface light. But if you're still reading, you're not one of them. You already know. Your soul isn't seeking comfort. It's seeking rebirth, and rebirth requires something to die. So yes, your pain may be the doorway, and your symbols may be the new language you were born to speak. You may not fully understand it yet, but something has already begun. You've already started to change, not on the outside, but in the place that matters most, the space where your old self ends, and your true self begins. There's a moment in every seeker's path where the journey becomes a trap, where the ego, tired of hiding behind fear or pride, puts on its final disguise, the mask of being awakened. And that's where many souls get lost, not in darkness, but in golden repetition. Spiritual ego is perhaps the cleverest mutation of instinct. It doesn't want your soul to awaken. It just wants to feel superior while staying exactly the same. It wants you to sound enlightened, to say all the right things, to look the part, but not to truly change. Because real change threatens the system. And the system, even your inner one, is designed to protect itself. Have you caught yourself repeating spiritual phrases that felt hollow? Doing the rituals, but still feeling numb, trying to vibrate higher while still trapped in old fears? That's not evolution, that's adaptation. It's survival, wearing a rosary. It's fear, cloaked in affirmation, and it works. For a while, until the pain returns, until the silence feels empty again, until the mirror no longer reflects who you thought you were. Adaptation is the body surviving pain. Transformation is the soul transmuting it. The ego learns fast. It memorizes the words of sages, mimics surrender, performs compassion. But deep down, the same terror remains. The terror of letting go, of not knowing who you'll become, of facing your own unfiltered truth. This is the invisible error. Believing you've evolved when you've simply decorated your prison. Real awakening doesn't make you feel powerful. At first, it makes you feel lost, empty, disoriented, because everything false begins to fall away. And the self that emerges doesn't need titles, it just breathes. So if you're exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually, if you're tired of pretending to be okay, if you've outgrown the costumes of light, you're not failing. You're finally stepping into the real thing. This is the breaking point. The moment when evolution stops being a performance and becomes a surrender. Throughout history, one image has returned again and again, across cultures, continents, and centuries. A symbol feared, misunderstood, and quietly revered. The serpent, often demonized, misread, vilified. But beneath the myth lies a secret. The serpent doesn't just slither, it spirals, and in its spiral lives a hidden code, a map from flesh to awareness. Ancient traditions speak of a dormant energy curled at the base of the spine, Kundalini. Not metaphor, not myth, but symbol. And symbols are more real than facts, because they live inside us, waiting, remembering. When this serpent awakens, it doesn't explode. It unravels, not to impress, but to dismantle. It rises like a tide of heat, memory, chaos, disrupting what was. Never truly you. Unraveling beliefs, identities, masks. Because this is not a force of comfort, it's a force of revelation, and revelation rarely feels good. The ancient Egyptians knew it. Twin serpents coiled around the pharaoh's staff, one black, one white, uniting the seen and unseen. The Toltecs called it Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the meeting of sky and earth. The mystics of the Zohar whispered of it in veiled language, and those who have crossed the threshold of near death often speak of spirals, not tunnels, not stairways, spirals of light, as if their consciousness was moving through the DNA of the soul itself. This isn't poetic, it's archetypal, because our physical DNA spirals, and so does our memory, so does transformation, so does the journey inward. Our bodies hold maps, not maps of streets or timelines, but of meaning. Have you ever felt it? Grief in the chest, tightness in the throat, shame in the stomach. These aren't random, they're messages. Encoded. The body speaks the language of the unconscious, and the serpent is its oldest dialect. It rises when silence is present, when effort dissolves, when the seeker no longer clings to seeking. In many near-death stories, there is a moment, not just of floating, but of spiraling, as if their soul is being pulled inward, not outward. And when they return, something has shifted, not their face, but their essence. Because the real DNA is not physical, it's spiritual, a pattern, a pulse. Some ancient practices knew this. They didn't just move the body, they awakened it, with breath, with stillness, with intention. But you don't need a ritual, you need a return, to feel the body not as a machine, but as a mirror, a sacred coil of memory and awakening. Maybe you've already felt it, a strange warmth, a sudden vision, a dream you couldn't explain. Don't fear it. It might be the beginning. The serpent doesn't rise to harm. It rises to remember. It's The spiral path back to what was never lost, only forgotten. And if evolution is real, it will look more like a coil than a ladder. Not up, but inward. Not forward, but deeper. And it might already be moving. Right now, slowly, silently, within you. There comes a moment when everything seems to have changed. And yet, nothing feels different. You've read, you've meditated, you've cried, you've traveled inward, but somehow, the ache remains, disguised, lingering, and your soul feels trapped in an invisible loop, still repeating old pain, still seeking something it can't quite name. This is the moment of truth. And the question is simple, but sacred. Are you truly evolving, or just surviving with spiritual language? The difference is subtle and brutal. True transformation breaks you open. Survival just paints the walls. Spiritual survival looks enlightened. It talks about energy, shadow work, past lives. But beneath the glow, it's still running, still performing, still afraid to stop, to feel, to truly listen. Ask yourself, are you using rituals to numb or to remember? Do you still need validation to feel real? Are you afraid of stillness, and not because it's empty, but because it's honest? These aren't criticisms, they're keys. Because evolution doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like undoing, like sitting with the version of yourself that once had no choice but to survive. The you that clung, that feared, that believed love had to be earned. That version isn't wrong. It's just outdated. And the moment you stop needing it, something new can emerge. This is where real spiritual evolution begins, not in doing more, but in shedding, in listening, in allowing the false to fall. So let's try a ritual. Not a grand one, just a quiet remembering. Close your eyes. Feel your body as if it's telling a story. Ask yourself gently, what pain am I still repeating that no longer belongs to me? And wait, not for words, but for sensation, for image, for whisper. It may come in a dream, or a silence, or a single tear. When it comes, don't judge, just receive, and let it go. Because maybe you've already outgrown this loop. Maybe your soul is whispering, you're not here to manage your pain anymore. You're here to remember your light. And maybe now is the time to answer. What if the books you read, the teachers you followed, the visions you prayed for, weren't revelations, but reminders? What if your spiritual hunger isn't for something new, but for something ancient you've almost remembered? And what if awakening isn't about gaining light, but about surrendering the noise that kept you from hearing your own soul? Maybe Darwin never wrote his full theory, not because he lacked data, but because he sensed something words couldn't hold, that evolution doesn't end with the body. It begins with awareness, that humans aren't the final form. We're the threshold, the in-between, the sacred pause, not just beings of instinct, but carriers of memory, the serpent rising, the spiral unfolding, the silence revealing. The real transformation may not be physical, it may not even be visible. It may be happening right now, inside you, when you stop pretending, when you let the ache speak, when your spirituality no longer needs to protect, because it's finally ready to reveal. This kind of shift won't be loud, it won't get likes, it won't promise instant peace. It'll feel like losing, like floating, like forgetting what you thought you were, so you can remember what you've always been. Jung said, what you resist persists, what you embrace transforms. Cayce whispered, the soul knows all answers, it only forgot the right questions. Groff reminded us, death is not the end, it's the doorway through which consciousness is born. And maybe, right now, you're standing at that doorway, not of ending, but of return. Because what if the final revelation isn't out there? What if it's always been inside, humming beneath your fear, singing beneath your silence. And what if your soul doesn't need to become anything? It just needs you to remember. So before you leave, offer a sign. Write a symbol in the comments. A single dot. A silence. A fragment of what this stirred in you. Not to be understood, but to be felt. Because those who remember awaken those who still sleep. And those who see must recognize one another. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're remembering. And that changes everything.